farmland equivalent to 50 Central Parks in New York, and an annual plastic usage equivalent to 2,000 elephants. What does that have to do with Novo Nordisk and environmental impact? You're going to find out today. Because in this episode of The Great Switch, I've had the pleasure of having a conversation with two incredible leaders within the area of sustainability. Dorethe Nielsen, Vice President of Environmental Responsibility at Novo Nordisk, and Sofie Eggens, CEO and Country President of Schneider Electric Denmark. You will learn that Novo Nordisk is an extremely ambitious company in this area. With an ambition to have zero environmental impact, they do not only mean emissions, but zero impact on the environment and nature, not only for themselves, but for the full value chain. Having Dorethe from Novo Nordisk together with Sofie Eggens of Schneider Electric, both companies with huge ambitions in this area, gives us an opportunity to understand not only what ambition it requires to really make an impact, but also the kind of leadership and work it requires to achieve that ambition. So, Dorethe, I would like to kick things off asking you, what is the great switch you turned in your career? Where have you really made an impact?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you also for inviting me to this podcast. It's very interesting, and I really admire that you also take this responsibility upon you to talk to different people about this very important topic. So I've been in this area for the past 10 years. What springs to my mind when talking about some of the greatest switched or the things that I might be most proud of is when we launched our Circular for Zero strategy. We did that back in 2019, and that's really about having zero environmental impact by implementing circular economy. And we did that with a very long process, a little unusual for a sustainability strategy. It took like 8 to 9 months. We had somebody to help us, of course, but that was really an engaging strategy. So we went out having interviews with more than 300 colleagues. I drank a lot of coffee, had a lot of feedback from the business in terms of what is important, what can we achieve, but also, which I found very fascinating, we brought together people that might have not talked together, at least in terms of sustainability, that being the sales organization, R&D, production in the same room, because everybody is depending on each other. So that's what Circular for Zero tries to do, is to link Novo Nordisk priorities across the value chain in sustainability. And that, I think, made a difference. And we have introduced, joined the movement, which is like a bottom-up initiative. And we are like more than 4,000 colleagues being part of that. So sharing the same ambition and wanting to drive this agenda forward.
But that's super interesting, and I think we will go a little bit more into that when we touch upon the Circular for Zero. So let's keep that one in mind. But also because I would like to know a little bit more about you, and I've done some studying, and from what I can find, I see that you have studied chemical engineering and started your career as a process engineer.
Oh, you've been way back.
but took the journey to sustainability work. And I would like to know a little bit more about, how come that you took that kind of journey?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting question. And to be quite honest, that was just a coincidence. So sometimes you get opportunity in life that just comes across. I had a short period where I worked and lived in China. After coming back from China to Denmark, then I got the opportunity to lead the environmental health and safety here at Novo Nordisk. And that just came across as a very, very nice challenge, but also where I could see that I could both use my personal skill, my education as a chemical engineer, but also making sure that we also move ahead on the sustainability agenda, because the purpose of that for me personally is that the trajectory we are on at the moment, where we see climate change. I have 3 kids. I have actually 4 grandkids. So I become even more worried about the planet that we leave to our kids. And it may sound a little cheesy, but it's actually a big concern I have, and that concern has grown. But to be honest, then 10 years ago, it was maybe a little coincidence that I ended up here, but I've never regretted. And I think it's the most purposeful and important job that I've ever had.
How do you think it impacts your work today that you have the background as being engineer and a chemical engineer? Does that help you, or does it sometimes restrict you in driving sustainability?
I think it. I like to think that it helps me, right? Because I can understand some of the dilemmas. I can understand the technical solutions, but I'm not the expert. So I have also learned that to have the respect of my employees, for instance, when being a leader, then you need to know something, but of course you do not need to know everything. So at least that I can talk to the subject, that I can understand, that gives that kind of respect, and I can also, maybe in a good way, give some sort of direction without being or fall into the trap of being an expert and into every detail. So I like to think that it helps me.
Thanks, Dorethe. That really helps set the scene. I'd love to talk a bit about Circular 4.0. Novo Nordisk has been working with environmental responsibility for a long time. So when you launched the strategy back in 2019, did it change how you run the business in any fundamental way? Or was it more about formalizing an approach that was already there?
It was... Again, back to that, we were building on some of the great work that has been going on for the company for many, many years. As you rightly mentioned, we have always integrated financial, social, and environment into decisions and into the way that we are doing business. Introducing the Circular 4.0 strategy back in 19, with that, then we took a more holistic view on environment or sustainability, meaning that not only focusing on our own footprint, but have a value chain perspective. And of course, doing that, that also means that we start to care about how about the products that we put on the market. How will that look like from a sustainability point of view, and how will that look from a patient perspective? Because that is also something we need to have in mind. So what changed was that we looked at sustainability both upstream with suppliers, but also downstream with the products on the market. Did that lead to any big changes in the way we did business? Maybe not in the short term, but I think this is also for the long term. Especially when, we are pharma, so it takes like maybe when we start doing research, then it takes like 9 to 10 years before we have a product on the market. So some of the innovation we currently have on the market might be old innovation. So having that integration already now that we have started, having integrated environmental considerations into R&D, means that hopefully that the products that we put on the market in the long run are more sustainable than the one we have right now.
When I look at sustainability for pharma, I think that there are more topics than just the energy piece. And when we look at it from a Schneider Electric perspective, we look at topics like water consumption. When we look at the energy consumption, we look at how much have you electrified your processes, because we know there is a lot of waste when you're using gas burners or fossil fuels. We look at what you're also talking about, sustainability by design. So when we look at the products and, also down through the value chain. And of course, we look at circularity. Do you also look at those building blocks, or how do you see sustainability when you take a look at it from a Novo Nordisk perspective?
Yeah, so it is more or less all the topics that you just mentioned. So what is important from Novo Nordisk perspective or from a pharma perspective is, of course, all the resources that we use, and electricity is actually one of them, but also steam and heat. And by electrifying those, then of course we can minimize the carbon footprint. But I would say in general, then our most material topics it's on climate, it's on plastic. So the plastic that we use in in our devices. We deliver our product in a small plastic pen. It's nature. So nature being a new topic, and by nature we mean the land use, we mean water, we mean biodiversity, and also waste. And then lastly, also chemicals, to many surprises maybe, but we do use chemicals when we produce our products. Of course, they do not end up in the final product, but that is part of our production processes. So those are some of the key things that we need to take into consideration. And then we have our strategy, we call it Circular for Zero. And it's about having zero environmental impact, so that's the ambition level, and then by implementing circular economy. So we do really believe that circular economy or circularity is a key lever to obtain zero environmental impact. So we try to embed that in our business, you can say.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And just for our listeners here, perhaps a data point that would be relevant to them, that there are estimates saying that a farmer is responsible for 4% of the world's CO2 emissions. So it's not nothing we're talking about here. So the work that Novo Nordisk is doing is really, really important, not just for Novo Nordisk, but for the entire world. What has proven to be the most difficult area to change when you look at the work you've been doing the last 10 years?
I think that's the embedding it into the business, so into our products. So we can do a lot when we produce. We can buy, or ensure that we have renewable energy. We can maybe buy raw materials with a lower carbon footprint. That could be aluminium, that could be glucose, whatever we use. But making sure that our products are more sustainable. So having that product perspective, that's a long-term thinking. That's not something we just fix. I think we have come. Not a long way, but we have come, some way in embedding that. But of course, that also takes some discussions with leadership, with my leadership, on how we want to position sustainability in the company.
But when we speak about sustainability for Novo, I mean, for you guys to. And as we hear now, you are doing a lot of things as it comes to like your impact and the chemicals and plastics for the pens and everything like that. But when it comes to like partnerships and the people who you hire to partner up with or stuff like that, how do you make sure that they also follow down the same path as you do to try to stay as neutral as it comes when it comes to carbon, with having themselves electrified and stuff like that? How do you work with that part of your operation?
Yeah, so if we're talking about suppliers, for instance, then of course they are a big part of our carbon emissions. I think the last time we counted was 96% of our scope 3 emissions comes from, you can say, our suppliers. So we are very dependent on that we can convince or sometimes incentivize our good partners and suppliers to also decarbonize whatever they deliver to us. And we have done different things. Lastly, we have just launched a new initiative, Suppliers for Zero. Working with our suppliers is important in terms of reducing our CO2 footprint. Our suppliers account for like 96% of our scope 3 emissions. And of course, we do a lot when we work with them to incentivize or persuade them to decarbonize whatever they deliver to us. And just lastly, we have launched a new kind of Suppliers for Zero program, where we go out and discuss with our suppliers, with our key suppliers. We have if you count all of them, we have more than 60,000. Of course, we do not go out individually to 60,000 suppliers, but we take those that have the largest impact, and then they can be part of the Suppliers for Zero program, where we where we talk to them about what we expect in terms of delivering carbon-free, you can say, products to us, but also how we can help them. So share our learnings, share what we have done. And many of the things are rooted back to electrification, for instance, of their production. So we share the learnings that we have had in that. So definitely you can say we count a lot on our suppliers, and that's also a long journey, but I think we're off for a good start. Right now, we have about 45% of our carbon emissions related to the suppliers. They have actually agreed to shift to renewable power whenever they supply to us. So they have not done it yet, but at least contractually they have said that is something they would do. So I think that's something that we are quite proud of, that program.
I think you should be proud of that, 45%. That is a very large chunk. So congratulations. What is how is the message generally received by your suppliers when you come and discuss with them and come with this request? Because, we both work in companies that, on one hand, want to do their part on sustainability, but also on the other hand, we have owners, shareholders that is expecting us to deliver return on their investments. So there is always this fine balance between doing what is right for the society and for the world on the long term and delivering the financial results on the short term. So how do you see this, mostly in relation to your suppliers?
I think it differs a little. Companies that are in Europe kind of share the same ambition as we do. I think we have come far on that, and sometimes they are even also have programs for their suppliers. So here we actually share, and I guess maybe you are a good example of that. So here we share kind of the same ambition level. Then of course we could have suppliers that see this as something they have just started or are not willing to go into, and then they ask maybe for premiums, so that if we want them to do that, then of course we were asked to pay a premium. And we have this philosophy that sometimes we do, but that is really to make sure that we then on a long term can change a pattern. So it's not only paying one supplier doing it, but we need to see some kind of long-term innovation or long-term partnership. Then we are willing to, on a short term, to pay a little premium. And then of course I'm sit on the sustainability side. Then it's up to my procurement colleagues to have that embedded in the contracts, and then it's a matter of a negotiation, right? Maybe they get other things, and then it's up to them to negotiate a good deal. So here there's a very close partnership between our procurement colleagues and our sustainability people.
Right. Just coming back to this about being first mover or help an industry to start moving, I would like to ask you a little bit about plastic, because I know that we here in Denmark have the world's first green methanol plant, and you are one of the off-takers of the methanol there because it's used in your plastic. So can you share a bit your thoughts behind that? Because I assume, I don't know, but I assume that that's one of the areas where you do pay a premium to get part of that project.
Yeah. And it's something we are quite proud of. As I mentioned, then we deliver our medicine in a plastic pen. That plastic pen consists of different types of plastic. One part of that plastic we are actually now able to substitute with a new version of plastic, you can say. So until now, all our plastic is based on 100% fossil. So of course that's not so good. What we then did was to investigate, are there other technologies that can supply plastic or the raw material that is used to produce plastic in a more sustainable way. And we came across European Energy as a company, and then we start talking to other large companies, Danish companies like Lego and Maersk. Lego, of course, you all know Lego. They produce small plastic bricks, and Maersk, they use e-methanol in their ships. So we all kind of share the same raw material, that we had a common wish to decarbonize. So we went together and have that dialogue with European Energy, where they actually now have made a facility in Kassø where they produce e-methanol that can later on be used either in ships or to produce plastic. And what they do, and now it becomes a little technical, is that simply using carbon capture, capturing carbon out of biogas, for instance, and then power to X, and then combined, then we can then produce e-methanol. So it is exactly a project where we decided to move into, because we pay a premium, meaning that we then invest in innovation. That was also what happens with the renewable electricity. In the beginning, we all paid a premium. Now it's becoming less, and even sometimes it's cheap, right? Especially when the sun is shining. So having that philosophy of investing in some technologies with the aim of scaling that later on, and that becomes becomes cheaper. That's philosophy. I hope that others will follow that way. And it's, who would think that the Maersk, Lego, and Novo Nordisk could go together in a partnership? I mean, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, that's the right word.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, with the quality requirements you have, because of the nature of your product, you can't just use recycled plastic. That would be immensely difficult, I would assume.
Yeah, you can say our long-term vision is to have a closed loop. Now we go back to the circularity. So we also have an initiative, a take-back initiative, where it's possible for patients to deliver in their used device after they have emptied it, and then we make sure to collect it from the pharmacy and then reuse the plastic. Right now we cannot reuse it in our own pens, as you rightly say, because we have strict requirements on quality, but that's the aim long term. That's also why we cannot just reuse plastic. We need some quite, the standards are quite high, of course.
Yeah, and I think that is what makes your effort here really interesting, because many times when you see companies talk about reduce plastic or emissions from plastic, it's through packaging or other less core parts of their product, whereas you are really working with the heart of your product with very high quality requirements.
Yeah. That's right. And maybe also that's why sometimes it's difficult, because you do not just change your core product overnight. Also because we do have a lot of regulatory approvals adhere to the specific product. So we need really to be mindful of when we change something. How do we do that in the best possible way? So we ensure that the patients still can get our products, of course.
So now we're talking about plastic. How much plastic are we talking about here? Does it really matter, or is it just a corner of your emissions?
No, so plastic is one of the major driver of emissions. And just to get a sense of the numbers, then we are producing and delivering 850 million injection pens per year globally. That corresponds to 16,000 tons of plastic yearly. And then we have tried to calculate that in elephants. So that's 2,000 elephants for those of you that want kind of have the metrics on elephants and not on tons.
Wow.
So
2,000 elephants.
2,000 elephants
in plastic.
For whatever that matters.
In
but
plastic.
Wow. Quite a bit, obviously.
Let's move more towards, because I would like to speak a little bit more about like the huge part that is Novo Nordisk and the growth that comes with it. As we have seen, it's probably no surprise to anybody that Novo Nordisk has experienced massive growth for an already huge company. So back in 2023, your sales grew 31%. In 2024, it was 25%. We don't have the numbers for 25 yet, but from the investor presentations and so on, we see that we can see like a continued growth. But at the same time, your aim is to halt nature loss by 2033. So how is this extreme growth in very grave climate ambitions possible to achieve at the same time?
But that is also my biggest headache, you can say. Of course, it's nice that our business is growing, but when you have the task to then get your environmental footprint to zero, then the task becomes even bigger year on year. So quite concretely, there are different levers that we can use. Of course, making sure that some of the products that we put on the market are longer lasting. So, for instance, shifting away from a single-use pen to a durable pen. Then if a pen can be used several times, then of course we need to produce less pens, and then hereby lowering, you can say, our footprint. So thinking about the product that we put on the market are more durable than the ones that we may have right now. Then, of course, if we zoom in on our production units, energy efficiency, that of course you also were working with, electrification, making sure that each and every plant, if they're running with zero output, then I can scale as much as I like without having any impact. So of course that's a core. Then making sure all the raw materials that we buy have a lower carbon. Going back to the plastic we just talked about, if the plastic have low carbon, then we can use as much plastic as we want. Another example of that could be raw materials that we use quite a lot. That is glucose. And you might ask, why do Novo Nordisk use glucose? That's because we have a quite unique way of producing our products. We use yeast, as you do when you bake. So that yeast, when it's fed with water, glucose and other salts, then they express or produce actually our products. So it's actually a very environmental friendly way of producing. Other companies, other production processes are more like chemical intensive. But of course, having that production process, we use a lot of glucose. Glucose is produced either from maize or wheat. Maize or wheat are grown on land. And here we want to make sure that the land or the way it's produced is more sustainable. So we have a regenerative agriculture project where we go out and talk to the farmers so they can produce the maize and wheat in a more sustainable way. And then you might ask, but how much glucose do you then use? And if you combine it or convert that into hectares, then it's actually 17,000 hectares. That might not seem a lot, but it's actually like 50 Central Parks in New York. So that's the amount of land we take up, but just for one of our raw materials.
One question that comes to mind in all of this is, when you take, as we can hear, you take a lot of responsibility for all the steps in the process of making your products. But when you speak about the glucose and the yeast, and then you get me going, right? And then then you have me. So and that makes me wondering: is those kind of initiatives, like to use those kind of things, are you involved in the development process of that? With the, in my mind, I see professors with, the kind of setup as you had in school with boiling pots and whatnot, trying to discover new ways of being sustainable. Are you involved in that kind of process as well? Founding that kind of business, or are you just using, whatever is at hand today?
Mm. No, we are. So we have in-house research and development. So we are used for developing our own products. Now we start acquiring more, but in the past we have developed everything ourselves. So of course, my job is then to make sure that the products we develop today are more sustainable than the ones we have on the market right now. So we have concrete targets for our R&D colleagues on when they discover new molecules or new devices. They need to look at the carbon footprint. So we can actually calculate the carbon footprint of different products and processes. They look on the chemicals that we might use, and they look at the plastic. So those are the three metrics that we have integrated in our R&D discovery, you can say.
So now we've talked about the raw materials. We've talked about the drug discovery process, and you've also briefly mentioned your manufacturing process. And just thinking about, the large growth that you are having and foreseeing in the future, I would like to come back to, the energy consumption in your manufacturing process. I know you're building very large factories here in Denmark and also outside Denmark. How do you work with the whole energy side of that? Because one thing is to source renewable electricity, but listening to how ambitious you are, I expect that your view on energy goes beyond just resourcing the type of energy that you're using.
Yeah, so you're talking about also the supply, so making sure that we have enough, or...
So I was wondering about the supply. I was also wondering about how do you work with energy efficiency? Do you have, you have your very ambitious targets for your R&D and your drug discovery? Do you have the same for your manufacturing facility, sort of to break the link between output and energy input, or help me understand how you see this?
Yes. So we have a quite good understanding of the electricity use or the energy use at each site. We are ISO 14001 certified, and when we are that, then we also need to work with the continuous improvement. And continuous improvements, that means that every site have a year-on-year target on how can they minimize or lower their consumption of electricity and water and waste. So that they have actually targets on each site, yearly targets on how they can lower the energy output, or the energy use, not output, the energy use.
And is that the absolute energy use, or is it relative to the output? Just coming back to the big challenge we discussed before, how do you reach your very ambitious targets at the same time as you have the growth?
That's an absolute.
That's an absolute.
So that's an even harder target, you can say, than a relative.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how do you equip your colleagues in manufacturing with measures to achieve those goals?
I would say that's their responsibility. So me being more like a strategic unit, then we ensure oversight of the strategy. We ensure that we have targets on each site, and then it's up to them to figure out, is it specific, where in the production facility are there a biggest opportunity to shift or to minimize electrical consumption. And what are the measures to do that? So usually we are not involved in that, but I can tell from the numbers that they're doing a good job.
All right. So perhaps I can share a bit of what they're doing, because we are helping you with parts of it. So it's about monitoring the energy and electricity consumption in on the machines, on the building levels, etc. So they know the process very well. And then it's really going deep and analyzing the processes, both to understand where can we get more output of improving the processes and improving the quality, and where can we lower consumptions by fine-tuning the operations of the machines together with the air quality, so the humidity, the temperature, the airflows, etc. And there is quite a large energy consumption going into this. So if we look at a typical pharma company, I haven't looked at Novo Nordisk, I don't know the data there, but for a typical pharma company, 60 to 65% of their electricity consumption goes into heating, ventilation, and air conditioning together with the process. So it is fairly large amounts of energy we're talking about here.
Yes, yeah, but that's right, and I not only for the production but also the stable load, right? So what we need, no matter how much we produce. Yes. Of course, I can guess this is also quite something to go after, and then of course making process optimization in the production processes. So whatever we can produce more with less is of course also what's going on in the different factories.
So taking it back a bit to the growth versus sustainability part, what would be your advice for other companies who would like to achieve the same results as you? I mean, because there are so many ways of doing this, right? Incentives or using a whip. What would be your advice?
So, kind of very concretely understand your impact. So, there's a lot of things you can do in sustainability. Pick the 3 biggest one. Do your assessment. Is it on climate? That is your biggest one. Is it on water? Is it on waste? And then zoom in on those. So do not try to solve everything. Zoom in on what matters the most to your company, and also where you contribute maybe to sustainability in general. And then do not be so afraid of just go out and execute. I mean, we can do a lot on data. Sometimes I feel that we get lost in data. We can do, the last digits and so on. But of course, know your biggest impact and then go out and pilot. Go out and do partnerships. And not be so, not afraid is not the right word, but I actually like the slogan from Nike, just do it, right? So sometimes you fail, and I think that's fine, as long as you don't make the same mistakes twice. Of course, that's part of it. And then also go out and do partnerships. So I truly believe that this is not something we can solve alone. It's not where we should compete. We should collaborate with suppliers. We should collaborate with regulators. We should collaborate with peers. Even we have a very strong peer network in pharma, where we actually go together and try to solve some of the big issues. We should not compete. And then lastly, which might be the most difficult one, is to get your leadership on board, because they're the ones ultimately, of course, that needs to make those decisions on whether we want to move this needle or not.
Absolutely. So what you're saying is understand your baseline, so you know what your levers are. Don't be afraid to act, but then start to act instead of waiting for the last final digits to be calculated. Collaborate broadly with customers, with suppliers, with peers. Here we even discussed with other partners in the industry that might not be peers but will have the same interest in you, and then get your leadership on board. So if that is your advice to other companies, what would your advice be to other leaders if they are to make their great switch, either in the sustainability piece or more generically in their career or their own lives?
Be bold and be brave, I would say. Sometimes you just need to own it. And you need to be bold in what you do. That's at least what kind of comes to mind in the sustainability area, because here you need sometimes to show the way, and you need to sometimes break new ground.
Bold and brave, yeah. That really resonates with me. What we do in Schneider Electric, and what also brought us to be nominated as or named even as the most sustainable company in the world, was also being brave enough to set ambitions where we had no clue how to achieve those targets. But we set the aspiration high, and then we started to figure out what actions would take us there, and rather act now than wait for tomorrow. And we continue on that journey. And sometimes us in the operations, we are a bit under pressure because of that. But if you don't aim high, then you will never get there.
Yeah, I like that. That really, really resonates with me. And if we don't, if we only aim for like second best or third best, then we might not even get there.
May I ask you a more personal question?
Sure.
So being bold and brave, if you look back at your own career, is there anything that stands out where you took a bold and brave decision there, not knowing where it would bring you?
But we moved to China back in 2010 with the family. I took a job in China, also with Novo Nordisk, and that was of course a big adventure. I took my family and landing in China, not knowing a single person, being responsible for the whole family and so on. So that was for me a bold move. But also taking this job, I had now I have 10 years of experience, so of course that's a lot now. But back then I had not worked in sustainability before. But I like those challenges. I think that's something that that kind of sparks the energy in me, making those moves where you are on a little shaky ground, but usually you land, right? And that's and if you sometimes do not land, then at least you have learned how to swim, right? So then you get going anyway.
Yeah, and then you can try again.
Then you can try again
because a failed start doesn't mean that you will not get there in the end. It just means that you need another couple of tries before you get there. And I guess that also relates to sustainability, that sometimes we have to try something.
Yeah.
And then if it doesn't work out, then we try again, because the task is given for all of us.
Yes. Yeah, and we are breaking new ground. We need to find new solutions. That's what we're here for, right?
Well, I think that sums it up. Thank you, Dorethe and Sophie, for being a part of this and sharing so many insights into this area.
Thanks a lot, and thank you for inviting me. Very interesting and inspirational, and looking forward to hear more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope that you found inspiration for the great switches that need to happen in your own company. If you found the podcast inspirational or just useful, we would love to have you leave a review. And please subscribe to the podcast, because we will be back with more interviews with leaders of the great switches towards sustainability, electrification, digitalization, giving you the insight on how to achieve impact in these areas. Until next time, I'm Oliver Oberg, and it was a pleasure having you listen in.